We do want to stay on this story now. For that, I want to bring in Maria Lipman. She's a Russian journalist and commentator who fled her country shortly after the war began, and she joins us now from Evanston, Illinois. Maria, thank you for making time for us.
Thanks for inviting me.
So up until last year, you were a longtime resident of Moscow. Could you explain to our audience the significance of the Victory Day parade in Russia?
Well, this is by far the most important holiday in Russia, celebrated for decades now. The celebrations have grown much grander under President Putin because he sees, and rightly so, the war, the memories of the war and the memory of victory as a single event in the Russian history that is truly uniting the Russian people. The Soviet Union lost 27 million people in World War II, which means actually that every family has its own military history, military memories, its own fallen soldiers to remember on that day. However, ever since President Putin became the president of Russia, the celebrations grew not only much grander. We had nothing like that before in the Soviet Union or in the first post-Soviet decade, but also much more militarized. The memory of the war is no longer about the veterans, the fallen soldiers, the family history. It's about triumphalism. It's about jingoism, and especially, of course, since the Russian invasion in Ukraine.
And that's exactly what I wanted to ask you about next, Maria, in terms of the way that the celebration of Victory Day compares this year to last year, which was a few months after the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. You watched the Victory Day parade as it unfolded. You noted that under Putin it has become more militarized, much grander. Did you notice a difference between 2022 and 2023?
Putin has actually more guests, more world leaders attending the celebration this year. 7 leaders of the former Soviet Union republics, now independent states, have come to celebrate it with him. Of course, in previous years, especially earlier on, there were dozens of world leaders to come to Russia, but this year he's got 7. He didn't have a single one last year. Also, I would say, as your commentator already mentioned, the parade was somewhat scaled down compared to previous years. There was no flyover. That was an inherent part of previous year's parades. There was only one tank, as was also mentioned. And actually, I would say Putin's speech was interesting in that it too was in a way somewhat scaled down, talking about the goals of the current war, and he's now talking about a war that has gone on for 14 months. He actually was not talking about liberating Ukraine from the Nazi regime, which has become part of the official rhetoric of propaganda. He just mentioned defending people in Donbass. And when he said for victory in the very end of his speech today, actually, it, of course, implied not only the victory of 1945, but also a future victory in Ukraine. However, there is very little he's got to report as far as Russian advance is concerned.
You know, Maria, you raised what we've heard from Vladimir Putin, and one of the things that he mentioned was he said a real war, quote, has been unleashed against Russia by the West's untamed ambitions. So what were your takeaways from that positioning?
Actually, there is nothing new about that. This has been part of the Russian propaganda rhetoric and the speeches of Russian officials at various levels and Putin himself, that this war is not an invasion as it is seen, of course, in Ukraine, and naturally so, and as it is seen in the West. This is a war of defense, and the actual war was unleashed, as he said today, and as he said on many different occasions before that, by the West against Russia. So Russia is defending itself. And this argument and this propaganda formula actually has worked well in Russia. this perception of the war is quite widespread in Russia, and this helps people to perceive this war not as something criminal, not as something that is morally inappropriate, but something that is a legitimate national goal.
To that end, when you say a propaganda formula, I'm wondering what you know of how the war is being perceived in Russia, perhaps leading up to today's Victory Day celebrations.
I think it is perceived in different ways by different people. And we have two minorities, one being anti-war, and actually in public opinion polls, even today, some people are not shy to say that they do not support the special military operation the way the war is referred to in Russia. The word war is forbidden in this context. But there's also a minority of jingoists, of people who really want to fight to the end and, I don't know, destroy Kiev, kill President Zelensky, a minority who actually believe that Putin's war is not decisive enough. And there is a majority among which I think it is fairly common to try not to think about the war. When asked in public opinion polls, they would say they support it, but this is disquieting to think about this war whose goal is not quite clear, and where people are dying. So there is this desire to say, we don't know exactly what this war is for. Putin knows what he's doing. We need to support our country, of course, because this is a war of defense.